This week, almost 200,000 people are headed to Las Vegas for the annual Tech Orgy known as CES, the Consumer Electronics Show.
4,400 exhibitors, 2.7 million square feet of trade show floor, TV screens, drones, robots, computers, cars, smart everything.
But this year, some trepidation. Is the tech party over?
I'm Gene DeRose on a virtual tour of CES.
And I'm Steve Rosenbaum, and this is Future Forward. Let's launch. All right, Gene, trick question. Do you remember your first CES?
Yes. Yeah, I was probably first or second year I was at Jupiter, which, God forbid, I believe early 90s, 91 probably. And I have a theory that it's kind of come full circle, which I'll tell you about. But man, it used to be about the lines. If you didn't bring a long Russian novel, what good were you?
So I remember the first year, I wanted to look snappy. I had a suit and tie. I was all ready to go. And I went out the night before I left for Las Vegas and I bought a new pair of shoes.
Holy cow. Wow.
Maybe the stupidest thing you could ever do. Because what's impossible to explain to people that have not gone to CES is it is enormous. It is, and every meeting you have is always on the other side of 4 football fields. So it's an endless, like it is so painful. It is a painful show.
Yeah, and even the night times, because and it's still true today, the way those Vegas casino hotels are linked, you could walk 2 miles in a night going from a couple parties to meet someone to whatever else.
And, they've added anyway, so enough about so this year we're going to go through some categories, talk about some stuff, but I also think we're going to talk about the looming question about relevance.
Yes.
So let's just start. With TV screens. For the last bunch of years, it was going to be 3D, and then it was going to be rounded screens, and this year they're going to be flexible screens. Does anybody care?
Assistants, they're trying to integrate all that stuff. I think the answer is really, no. I mean, and I put it this way, it's not the selling point. And I think part of what we get lost in here is the silliness around the hype, because I don't think it is very often contextualized the right way. The important strategic issues are what they are, but the people that are there are not the business people, the marketing people, the executives trying to understand the ecosystem. It's buyers and sellers. And honestly, what was your criteria in buying your most recent TV? Or what would it be if you haven't bought one in a few years? Price, screen size, quality.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
No, and honestly, I don't want I don't want anything built in. I don't want it to have a hard drive. I don't want it to have Roku or TiVo or anything built in.
Well, let's just talk about that for 1 second, and then we'll move on. Which is, I do think that there's a standard. If it is not modern enough to be compatible with your sort of beam your screen from your iPhone or your iPad or whatever, or your Android, that's crazy. And if it doesn't have some already built-in interface, which almost all the good ones do, for you to see Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever, but beyond that, those things aren't selling points. And I think at this point those are de facto. So would you use your look, the biggest news that I saw was about these assistants and talking and the speakers like Alexa being built in. Would you talk to your TV? Do you need to?
As it is, we talk to our Alexa to turn lights on and off, and I'm not sure it's made anything any easier.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about yelling at Lou Dobbs or some lunatic if you happen to be spinning through them. But, that's the way I feel about it. And I do feel like it will be a while before anything voice or intelligent catches up to the speed with which we can navigate with our fingers on the remote and the different screens we want to use and the channels and the DVR.
All right. So what about 8K versus 4K? How many K do you need?
Boy, I vacillate between arrogant disdain and feeling like I'm not getting something, like there's something I'm missing here, because I really do feel like there could be very few things that are as ho-hum as this, not just because it's an inevitability, but because I think it's it's a misunderstanding to think it's going to change things so dramatically. I mean, the articles were all talking about how this cements the move to mobile. So what? Who cares? And honestly, if you can get better than current cellular data services, better than existing Wi-Fi or public location bandwidth.
Hold on, we're confusing Ks. I'm talking about 8K TVs, and you're talking about 5K mobile. No. But by the way, it's great that we screwed that up because it's a clue about it. I mean, we're pretty sophisticated consumers, and we're just overwhelmed with tech mumbo jumbo jargon nonsense.
Yeah, and as an analyst and a critic, I was going for the jugular. So having missed hating it, I wanted to go right ahead to the thing that I hate. But look, I do feel the same about both of them, which is I find it hard to believe that they're that significant. Now, let's go back to say, do you have a good snappy definition of 8K before we get to 5G?
It's twice as K as 4K. You know, it means I have to have more bandwidth and more, I don't know. Part of it is when I want to engage a movie in a movie-like experience, I go to the theater.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And so in my living room, I mean, I have surround sound. I got a bunch of speakers and all that stuff, but I don't expect it to be, you know, dazzling.
You know, I'll separate it a little bit. Look, the fact that, you know, home theater quality is not just for, you know, millionaires and billionaires anymore is a big deal. But I will spend the money on it, and integration and bandwidth and quality matters a lot, but it's not the story. The story is whether it manifests in products we can use. And you know what, honestly, stringing all this stuff together is the stuff that there needs to be news about, because how do you manage it? I feel like I'm pretty wonky without being an engineer, and I hate getting caught at this, you know, it's just hard to make the stuff talk to each other well.
I agree, but I don't. We'll save that for another day. Let's go to virtual assistants. Yeah, we won't. I can't say the name out loud because it'll screw with my living room. But like, is there anything on the horizon? Are we going to see CES? You know, is Google Home going to break its way out?
Let's talk about, so here's the thing. I think in the context of a CES, it's a very boring story because, you know, we're really not, it's hard to see there's a lot of elbow room around the 2 or 3 big players. And I say 2 because it's Apple and Google, and then 3, and Amazon, and 3 because Google's not far behind. It's really those 3 players. And everything else is kind of secondary, you know. To the extent that virtual assistants and virtual assistant-like things work in advance, they have to fall in with those guys, and I'm not interested in much else. And so I would love it if the voice commands were more easy to understand, but these are more strategic stories.
Well, you said Apple, so let's talk about Apple for a minute. So Apple has always made a decision as a company to not participate in CES. Yes. For many, many years, they had Macworld, which happened either right before or right after CES. And there was always, so Apple is always the 800-pound gorilla in the room in Las Vegas that doesn't show up. So Siri is not going to be at CES.
Right. And you would think, you know, okay, so are we talking about the state of that? You know, so it becomes a question about whether we're talking about CES or not as a thing. And so since we mentioned it at the outset, and you just did, I think that's a big deal. And I think that right now is a great time for CES and the idea of hardware integration and where it's going. But, you know, as you and I said offline, and let's just go to the judgment, you know, it's a little ho-hum this year because it's other stuff that matters, right? Apps, standards, what Apple's doing, whether there's content for the devices, how some of these new guys, the breakthroughs aren't that interesting, and things like AR, VR cars, etc., it's just kind of slowly moving, right?
Everything seems to be in slow motion. I mean,
yeah.
I love
not flat, but slow motion.
I love drones, but I have trouble believing I'm going to see, you know, I love going to the Parrot booth and seeing all the Parrot drones, but I have trouble believing there's going to be a, like, a wow, oh my God moment. By the way, wearables seem to be dead.
Yeah, well,
Fitbit's
look,
dead.
that is a good point. Wearables is it's just a word that didn't. It should be a good year for that. And I'll say this about CES because what people probably should understand in the 25-year view, if they're not that old or within that narrow world, is it used to be because cable and TV integration and digital was coming that all these electronics were brought into the world of all this advanced technology, and then the internet came and it kind of put a damper. For 5 years, people didn't care that much about CES, and it was Comdex and Internet World and these other trade shows. But now we're in the world of Internet of Things coming on, and things talk to each other. But does it matter that much? You and I and others like us go there because it is a good chance to see demos of things and be sold the visions of people, and that's a sort of a different thing than the business of CES. But I look. I'd be excited to go this year because I haven't been in 3 years, and I'd get to try on a bunch of headsets, and I haven't done that in a long time. But that's pretty kind of boring.
Yeah, I mean, so Gary Shapiro, who runs CES, says that this is going to be the year of AI. That's his big thing.
What do you think he means by that? I think if he means that he's got a good programming spin on it to make it really interesting and compelling and integrated with the selling that has to be done, that's the most you can hope for. But if he's saying this is the year AI hits its stride, it's just the biggest load of malarkey.
Yeah, I don't know. I will tell you, I saw an Intel keynote at CES, I think 3 years ago, that was so spectacular. They had like 1,000 of these little mini drones up in the sky doing essentially fireworks above the audience. It was, I mean,
I like that. And at a certain business to business level, I am almost more interested in if they could figure out how to bring CES to the masses better. Here's a good idea for AR or AI or VR is give us a vivid way to experience it and be there, because it is about the messaging rather than selling the products, except for those people that are buying for stores.
Self-driving cars, always fun to see the prototypes of cars that are never going to get built.
Yeah, I actually think that, I always found at CES the little things that might be around a mini ecosystem that were fun, right? Even if it was right when wireless in the home started to take off, there was all sorts of initial kind of dumb devices and stuff. And I think that still is an interesting category, right? Security, lighting, a few other things, just to see what the little gadgety things are that can talk to your network, and that's great. Cars, the reason I mentioned that preamble is if an ecosystem within your car and a lot of apps and stuff start to be interesting around the self-driving, that's great. But I don't know what the newest feature Tesla's going to have, or whether I'm not sure what the story is on it.
Yeah, fair. It's a fair question. All right, so we had a couple of links of future car tech stuff, but I mean, the one thing I will say, and I don't see this written a whole lot, but if driverless cars really do show up, or even augmented driving in the next 3 to 5 years, the one thing it's going to do is turn cars into entertainment centers. I mean,
that's true, right?
You're going to be on your phone, texting, watching video, playing VR games, doing stuff while the car takes you somewhere.
Yeah, and in a way, the bleeding edge of that is what's happened to kind of taxis in the last few years with some of those screens and things like that, if you're allowed to have your hands free. But again, what will approach, it's kind of like when the GPS and the Wazes first showed up and the Google Maps, and they immediately became 100 times better than those Garmins and things like that we had in our cars, right? I find it hard to believe it's not going to just give us more time to be on our iPhones. Right? What will make that better other than, again, good integration? I wish I could voice activate my iPhone's audio system to, make things happen.
All right, so this wasn't really part of the CES story, but I think we ought to go here for a minute just because of the week we're having. Apple, big write down, market loss, sales slowing. Any of that come as a surprise to you?
A little bit, only in the um, is it incrementalism or is it not side? And by that I mean whether this was an excuse or they've been sitting on this for a while. They sort of put some of it off to the data on people are not in such a rush to replace their iPhones. They're holding on to them for longer, and then that single thing is not playing into their expectations, and it runs off over into watches and accessories and things like that. I I do feel like that's a big issue, right? You know, I don't think they ever had a model for how they were going to really port you from one thing to the next. But for a while, they were able to generate enough buzz that once every 18 months, you kind of felt like you had to get a new one. And you and I have talked about this on and off air, but we might go 2 or 3 generations skipping it, and we're the must-have guys.
Yeah, no, I was in the Apple store the other day because my son's phone needed to be upgraded, and I had the 10XS Max, whatever the new 10 is, in my hand, and it's a little thinner and it's a little prettier, but I didn't feel like I had to have it.
Oh, look, I think this is a little bit attached to a broader story in business that's been talked about for the first time in kind of ages seriously, which is why are we so attached to the stock market and the idea of growth and, that kind of gambling on that being the judgment of a financial success, which is an issue for Apple because when you've hit market saturation and you own such amazing ongoing profits, do you still have to grow at 10 or 15% in net, in revenue and
Yep.
size of business every year? I don't, boy, it only matters to a few companies that have so hit the market, but they're never ever going to have more market share, right?
So
because the part of the story is the cheap Androids that are out there everywhere now.
So if anything could break out of this year's CES, if anything could be a headline that we aren't, I do think we're right on the verge with AR, VR. Maybe this is the year that a low-priced, amazing pair of goggles comes from a company you haven't heard of and really the market just wakes up to it. Maybe this is the year.
Well, look, if I was a journalist going there with hard, hard beats and questions and having to drum up hard-hitting stories, I would want to know what's going on with Oculus and has Facebook fallen on its face with this, or it's just not a big enough story, or how did they do? Because I don't know, what's the verdict on that? Was that a first step? Was it just
what
do you have any insight into that? I feel like
I bought the Facebook Go, the low end Oculus, and returned it. Everyone still seems to have their fingers crossed that Magic Leap is going to be a play, but whatever that slow rollout thing they did 6 months ago has pretty much underwhelmed the market.
Yeah. I mean, I look. I think you said it at the outset of your heading of this area, which is the product that's going to hit it and be the price and the whatever. I do think the $50 and under is one way. I do think the second is a major app that you can only do amazingly there, might pull the tail wag dog. And then the third I continue to go back to a little bit is, I know Google Cardboard was more of an exercise, but why? Maybe it just needs to be more fully integrated with our phones. I don't know.
Well, that was all right. So I just want to make sure we don't miss anything.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of mobile wearable. Garmin has a wearable. Fitbit, Fossil has another one. Samsung has a wearable. Galaxy Watch. I mean,
I think wearables are an interesting market because, again, I think that plays to the CES is humming when there's waves and waves of small and medium-sized things. It's a headline, but not a substantive big deal if one giant product, wins the PR battle. We're postmodern to that kind of a world. So I feel like the buzz dialogue at CES needs to kind of reconfigure itself. And I say that because wearables are interesting. We haven't heard anything, but it wouldn't surprise me if if there isn't a lot of stuff that could happen. One thing they said are that the watches are going more towards health than towards fitness. And that makes sense to me because the mere ability to track your heartbeat through, your wrist opens up worlds of opportunity. That's almost the existence of established, conditions or behavior.
Samsung, they've had ups and downs. They put on a big booth.
Yeah, I actually think they're not. They never cracked the code like like Panasonic and Sony did on being sort of splashy with consumer electronics. They've been done it with their phones and been content to sort of just be as good as everyone else on TVs. I'm surprised they haven't made a bigger deal with something that's a little more integrated, or they haven't thrown themselves at Google and said, "Let us be your battering ram," right? Because that was kind of where it was going a while back. But I think that it's the software that these guys might take advantage of, and it just seems to be a backwater at this point. 5 years ago, it was a lot bigger deal.
So Sony was always a booth that had great toys to play with, but not in the last couple of years.
Oh, not in a very long time from a meaningful point of view. Even when they still had the ability to deliver sex appeal, they were not in the vanguard of anything. It's been 20 years and CD, stuff that was the last time they were breaking barriers.
Although I will tell you, my camera is a Sony. My still camera is a Sony, and I like it a lot.
Yeah, and I have a Sony TV that I like a lot. But it's not. It doesn't rise above, anything much for me. So it's a slow year, even though there's more going on that's digital than there ever has been. And home automation and smart homes, that's a thing, right? That used to just be a myth we talked about every year. But it'd be interesting. Maybe something could pop out in terms of in the light energy security management. But
I was out at an appliance store the other day, and they had a living and breathing for delivery smart refrigerator with a great big LCD front and all kinds of be able to know what's in the fridge and tell you the dates of all. And I just thought, the last thing I want to do is have to call a refrigerator repairman to show up and fix the LCD on my refrigerator. Like,
it's true.
Because you can't ship it back to the factory. What do you do when it breaks? I mean,
I'm not convinced that, again, and I think Amazon only sort of pretended to make a big deal about that a month or two ago. One or two minor. They let someone do their R&D by announcing one or two very small consumer electronics manufacturers. We're going to be playing around with their talk to Alexa, microwave, fridge. Honestly, not very sexy.
All right, so let's we have a few minutes left. Let's fantasize for a moment. So we get in a time machine and we go forward, say 3 or 5 years, and it's CES time. Like if this is the what's the what do they call that, this is the valley of despondence. Now what do they call it? Where, after everything's been
not the chasm.
What's the, I mean, I think you
where will it be?
But I think you nailed it a few minutes ago. It is all about connectivity. I mean, what scares me is I don't want to buy anything because I'm afraid the effort it'll take. So I was trying to explain to my son the other day that we have a smart home hub that isn't Alexa, but is connected to Alexa, which runs lights, and he couldn't understand why that wasn't what Alexa was.
And I think that's a really good point, which is the management and the connectivity and the networking. But I think you reminded me of a separation between that and this other piece, which is general consumer understanding of what the heck it is or why you would do things other than this or that individual gimmick. And honestly, I feel like to agree to try this or that these days adds up to so many ways of opening yourself up to sort of security trespassing. Yep. I worry about a lot of that. And I am never a person that worries about that. But I feel like nobody's wants to hold the bag on managing the central network.
Well, think about what the world would be like if when you went to the store to buy a light bulb, back when Edison was wiring electricity, if there were 4 different kinds of light bulbs and they all had different your house needed to have a different kind of electricity for, like the fact that these companies are all willing to essentially do scorched earth battles over systems. You have to make sure you have, I mean, I don't even know, like if I were to go and buy a smart light bulb today, I don't even know what I guess it would be a smart hub. I'd have to figure out which hub I have and make sure.
Well, it's funny you say it. I know a few people that are not tech people, but are insane, really steel knife managers of their budgeting and running a very efficient home. And they love that stuff because they use it to manage tightly against saving 30% on their electricity, which is unbelievable to me, and I don't necessarily believe it. And I say that because you and I are just kind of like, it almost feels like instead of we're early people on Facebook, but we're all going there, nobody's doing a set of standard things that the bleeding edge does and then the masses do. It's just so hodgepodge.
Yeah,
so I feel like
that's right.
There's not a road. And honestly, I want some transparency, and I think it would be better. I showed you that Thing app a long time ago. I use it on iPhone and iPad to see what's going on my network.
Yep.
I think we could benefit from something like if Steve Jobs was doing the smart home. Could you imagine what he'd create for us in the way of a UI and onboarding?
Yeah.
He wouldn't accept the bullshit of all these loose hanging strands.
So I'll tell you the thing I want. I want adhesive, polymer thin screen that I can stick on anything that's transparent until I send video to it, and then I want video wallpaper. I want someone to build me a stick.
I love that.
Yeah, I want to be able to put it anywhere. I want to be able to.
I think that's a brilliant idea. I mean, honestly, it's a version of stuff that we need.
All right, we are out of time. It was, as always, a fun, if not slightly gloomy, look at tech.
Yeah. But only because of the CES show.
Yeah.
I actually think it's a fine place we are at right now, politics notwithstanding. But
right.
Let's pick it up again next
All
week.
right, by next week, we will know what happened at CES. We'll have all the data. We will pull it together, and we'll find some things that are amazing. We will find you some amazing things. Have a good week.
Exactly.
Bye.
You too. Bye. Bye, everyone.